like almost long. Okay.
Welcome, YouTube. Facebook.
And
you're here too now.
Facebook's half here.
What's up? Oh, Facebook's getting
We're
itself
struggling.
figured out. All right.
Okay. Yes, hello. We are NSP, New Civilization Project for Boise State. We're the Critical Theory and Social and Political Philosophy Club. And today,
just a bunch of cut betas, if you ask me.
Basically. Yeah.
Well, if you consult our comment section, sorry, I've been looking at. We got some love.
YouTube ones.
Yeah.
Got some love.
Yeah.
Bunch of SJWs on campus somewhere,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, look at these elite liberals.
Liberal snowflakes.
Damn, if we're elite, I don't want to know where they're at in life. All right, so sorry.
Yeah, today we're discussing some queer theory, which we have not really done. So this will be a really good, really interesting conversation. I guess we just want to start once again by introducing who's here, names, pronouns. I'm Anne. My pronouns are she, her. And I found this piece very interesting, pretty easy to understand until the last bit, and then it was whoa, that was a lot. But I think I've been able to break it down pretty well and understand it.
Which way are we going around here?
Counterclockwise. Your turn.
So it's me next.
Yes.
I go by Dave or Lisa and prefer they them pronouns. I am in the midst of a search for a non-binary name, and it could last me the rest of my life. So who knows? We'll just keep going with Dave, Lisa for now. Delisa? No. Some people have tried it. Oh, it doesn't work. Or Lave? No, not working.
Oh, no.
not having it.
Even worse.
So this was a really interesting read. Helped me, I think, understand a couple of things. But before I get into any of that, I'll just say that through my own organization or my own personal brand now, Theory Plea, joining up with NSP, we'll begin reading Judith Butler's Gender Trouble next week.
Yeah.
That's the break reading. We don't really wait long because we're a bunch of geeks. So really the moment finals are out of the way, it's yeah, now we can read even harder stuff.
Oh, yay.
So I read it over the semester already, and then talked about it in the philosophy club, and was present for that. Astrid was present for that, and it was really fun and illuminating read. Okay, not fun. It was difficult, but it was illuminating, and so I'm excited to do that with y'all. So my hope with that is to be able to learn how to talk about it to a variety of people from different backgrounds who would find such a work impenetrable, which is most people, but to mainly in the work of going through it, come upon those key concepts that are really necessary for even getting into, much less situated in the field of just gender theory itself. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. This ties into all of that really well. So this is kind of a good primer conversation.
For sure.
I'm Ari, he, him pronouns. I unfortunately did not get to the reading, but hopefully I can get up quick and add to the conversation.
Ari, you said?
Ari.
Cool. Love your name.
Thanks.
Star or Astrid, you'll hear both she, her pronouns. And I have a headache, but I'm trying to be present as much as I can.
It's dead week for us. I think we're all a little bit dead right now.
But none of us are working as hard as you are.
No.
Shut up.
No. I know a little bit. It's real what you have to do.
Yeah.
The soft sciences lend to soft brains. We're all a bunch of dummies, but you doing that real stuff. So I can't even empathize because to do so would break me right now.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding about the soft brain.
we all got the joke. It's okay.
Okay.
So with that, let's start talking about this. It's called The Empire Strikes Back, a Posttranssexual Manifesto by Sandy Stone. That's all I know about it. No.
Let's see, I guess a little bit of historical context. When was the Transsexual Empire first written, which this piece is sort of a direct response to?
Was it 1955 or something? It was like, it was old.
And it should have been in the 70s.
79, yeah,
79. Yeah, so Transsexual Empire is the sort of foundation, or one of the critical foundations of the feminist school of thought known as radical feminism.
Trans-exclusionary.
Yeah, it's a specific branch of that feminist thought. And how to summarize that book real quickly and without being over broad.
Transsexual, and I'm using their terms.
Yeah.
Transsexual men to women are basically like imperial invaders of women's spaces and culture, and are in a sense raping women a step further than patriarchy already has by trying to dissolve the very category of woman itself.
Yeah, and invade their space and appropriate their power.
Yeah, and she attempts to do this, Janice Raymond, the author of The Transsexual Empire, by looking at the time what she considers to be a look at the evidence for what the increased medicalization of transsexualism, of like, because at this time it was still very much considered a new field, and so this was the first, back in the 60s, 70s was when things were first really mapped out of like, this is a diagnosis, and this is as a mental disorder, and the treatment for curing it is prescribing of hormones, certain surgeries, and that's kind of what Janice tries to base all of that kind of conclusion of. These are imperial invaders of women's bodies, right?
Janice being the name of the original author.
Yeah, of the Transsexual Empire, Janice Raymond, yeah.
Okay, and so
this is written in direct response to that. So because of the way that Janice went about with her whole foundations was basically, this is a bunk science, this isn't a science, there's no evidence for this. So because of that, in her response, Sandy Stone spends the majority of the time dealing with that, the foundations of the argument, because underlying the assumptions that she's making were that this is a historical phenomenon, first and foremost, that there's no actual evidence that this improves these people's lives, that kind of stuff. Sandy Stone feels like that's where the heart of the argument is. That's why she spends the majority of the time dealing with that, because that's sort of the foundations of the book, The Transsexual Empire. The part that is probably the most influential about this is the very, very end, which was section 4.
Yep. Yeah, the Posttranssexual Manifesto.
And that has become, from this piece, that section has become the probably foundation of a lot of postmodernist transsexual conceptions. She builds. This is the first time, like, that I'm aware of in writing, where somebody is trying academically building a theory of gender that's specifically from a what is happening here, like power, and what is the what is, I can't formulate words right now, but that's okay. Basically, the only reason that we have people like doing the work like Riki Ann Wilchins doing the work that she is doing the work. Who's another one right now? Julia Serrano.
And these are leading
leading academics.
theorists.
Yeah, so Julia Serrano, she's most famously known for her book Whipping Girl, which is an attempt to formulate gender, again, specifically from a transsexual point of view of like, hey, why is it that specifically this cornerstone of this particular cornerstone of femininity is attacked from all angles? Why is it that there's this left-wing and right-wing alliance specifically that sees this as the most abomination or whatever? And all of that, all of Julia Serrano's work, especially that book, which was, that was mid 2000s, I think 2007. That's building upon this. Who's another one? Kate Bornstein. I don't know if anybody knows that name as well. She was an original member of the Church of Scientology who later came out as transsexual, and herself I would consider a postmodern feminist. All of her work, again, is built upon the foundations that are laid out here in this essay from 1993, was it? 94, in the Posttranssexual Manifesto. But again, like I said, the heart of this essay is really in the very beginning, where she's trying to undermine all of the foundations of the arguments that Janice Raymond was trying to construct.
Yeah.
So I find it particularly interesting that the send-off, whatever it is, 5 or 6 paragraphs at the very end, are what had the greatest amount of staying power and had the most influence in the fields of gender theory.
That's how it used to be with a lot of the most essential essays and if you think of Gender Trouble as a sort of essay, it's kind of just a long essay. It's not a short book. Most of it, Butler is just saying like, so here are these main, all of these most influential people in all these disparate fields are kind of making the same sorts of errors. Here, I'm going to pull them all together, undermine all of that, recapitulate. And it's that recapitulation where you kind of set the basis again for something new that ends up being taught in classes, because the professors who read that go, all right, we're in a new chapter now.
Yeah.
Right. So that kind of makes sense.
It's super interesting to see as a nerd that still reads this kind of shit. That like, wow, well, there it is again. Like, it just keeps popping up. There's a whole nother journal that actually started, I think it was last year. I forget what it's called. This Studies of Transsexualism or something. Riki Ann Wilchins, one of the names I mentioned previously. She is like one of the leaders in starting up this journal, actually. But the very first publication, like they collected something like 100 essays, stupid long, in their first release of it. And I was like, wow, look at how many mentions of Sandy Stone's essay there are this time.
So this is hugely relevant. Yeah,
for sure.
Makes
and
me
like,
really happy you recommended it.
The fact that this is 25 years ago, and she's like, I feel like the very end of this is still like very relevant in the field.
Well, and so could I actually, so you've basically summarized the beginning part of, as far as like what is being responded to.
Sure.
But as far as like what it sets out to do, besides the debunking this or that argument,
sure.
Would you say it's a clarion call for people who have identified as transsexual or who have undergone transitions to think about renouncing their passing and kind of coming to the forefront or something, coming out as more public or something?
I don't think that that's an unfair reading, in the same way that you could read Butler in the same kind of way, right? Where she's look, we're free to self-express, and like we don't have to be limited by the construction of identity as it is now.
Like also in the essay at the end, after talking about the passing, she says, "In no way am I saying like don't try to pass because that's such an important. That's like the essence of identifying as transsexual and that experience." So like what I kind of got out of it is more she's saying, come forward with your experience. You don't have to completely eliminate your past. Like as soon as
right. And a bit of historical context too. In 1993, right, the way in which people came out as transsexual is entirely different than we do today, right? Today, like, if you think of, I guess I'll ask this open-ended, if you think of coming out as queer, trans, like, what is that involved to you?
What does
like,
it involve?
Like, what does coming out mean?
It's a Facebook post,
Okay, yeah.
To tell people to be public about your own identity.
So for some people, it's probably going to mean losing a lot of friends and family.
Yeah.
For it requires, it might mean expressing yourself differently in different spaces and burning bridges with some people, learning that some people were less tolerant than you thought, things like that.
So in 1993, when this was written, the accepted advice within the transsexual community was delete your fucking life. It's gone. You're a different person. You literally went from like, there was no sort of like this, when we think of trans, we think of like going from one to another, right? And it's this process of like slowly coming out at work and maybe to friends and family. And like back then it was like, no, and a very popular way of coming out or of being trans was literally deleting all social connections, moving to a new place, getting a new name, all of this at the same time, and like completely switching like on a dime. No, this is how I look now, and this is how I'm gonna dress, and like that disappearing, I guess is the right word. That was the way that you went about becoming a transsexual. And that's why she spends so much time about talking about passing specifically.
I just say trans people as the
Yeah,
answer.
well,
Sorry.
I guess, because we already kind of responded to what Daniel asked, but Daniel asked, who are the invaders? And basically, in the essay that Sandy Stone is responding to, Janice Raymond was claiming that like transsexuals are invading women's power, kind of, and like invading women and their gender.
Right.
Yeah. And I didn't want you to be ignored, Daniel.
Sorry, yeah.
You're good. So that was the accepted and the normal way of going about things. And so this is also, in a way, the beginning of the end for that. Like, when does it start? I think somewhere around 50, 49.
We're talking paragraph.
Yeah. She labels it paragraph 50, I think, where she talks about the essence of transsexualism is the act of passing.
Yeah.
Right. And oh God, I love the way she phrases that. She's a transsexual who passes is obeying the Derridian imperative. The genres are not to be mixed.
Yeah.
But that was the way that if you go back and you read any of the journals on transgender archive.org, the name might have changed, I don't remember. You can literally read all the old publications from like very early days of like, hey, there's this doctor that's willing to perform surgeries, like and everybody would jump on that, and because this was a pre-internet time, right? Everything was word of mouth. And also because this was a pre-internet time, it was much easier to just delete your life and get a new one. And this along with the internet are sort of the beginning of the end of that, being normal way of being a transsexual.
Yeah, so that's interesting. She also seems to think that it's potentially like really harmful, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's forcing people to lie.
Yeah.
So it's like at the exact same time that you're trying to better express yourself,
Yeah.
and be true to yourself, you're being forced to lie and to kind of sever all
Yeah.
ties with your prior self.
Yeah.
Right. And it's
also like damaging to relationships. As
yeah,
you
oh yeah,
mentioned in
absolutely.
there.
I mean, you're getting rid of, in a lot of cases, you're absolutely saying goodbye to your family forever, like just dropping off the face of the earth.
Mhm.
Like, it's super interesting if you talk to anybody that's like specifically transsexual women that are like in their 40s and their 50s about this, they will all be like immediately, when you talk about like pre-1995 even starting going into the 2000s, like they're all like, oh yeah, no, like we left our lives and went back. And it wasn't until like mid 2000s that it was considered normal enough for us that we went back and tried to reinitiate contact with our families. And that is something new that this generation, broadly speaking, like that's not the experience that one would have today if you came out as like at all. I mean, in some cases, if you grew up in a very conservative environment, of course you're going to face, like you talked about, social ramifications, but it's not, it's much more culturally accepted to the point where there's no silence about it. There's no like deleting your life, moving on, and then pretending to be a woman for the rest of your life. It's, oh, I'm going through this process and I'm still the same person. And like the framing is totally different now.
Mhm. Yeah, and then we have a question that I think would be a really good thing to get into, and that was, what exactly defines a transsexual from transgender? So talk about the difference between those
Yeah, I actually
two
have a note.
words.
So how about I use my
boy.
note? We talked about this before, right?
Yeah.
So, because I've seen people who really don't like the word.
There's a lot of people who don't like the word.
They don't really like the word, and well, maybe we can talk about the reasons they don't like the word. But yeah, some people really are offended when you use transsexual because what causes transgender erasure, or because it reifies this kind of biological binarism when part of the whole movement and the theory itself is to show that those divisions and dichotomies are less stable than that.
Yeah, so like according to the text, Sandy Stone defines it as transsexual, a person who identifies his or her gender identity with that of the opposite gender. So she claims that transsexuals blur the distinction between sex and gender by confusing performative character of gender with the physical fact of sex. So like that whole I'm in the wrong body.
Yeah.
That's how it's defined in this work.
And I think it wasn't until quite a bit later that the popularity of the term transsexual fell out of favor. And I think the reason for that is what you were getting at and Sandy Stone actually says this explicitly. I don't remember where, but the very word transsexual, right? It's a medical term.
Yeah.
And because of that, the framing of it specifically in medical literature at the time was, these people have a mental condition, and the only way to basically prevent them from killing themselves is to go under this medical procedure, and that is a transsexual. And the word is built upon that medical definition.
Which was itself, and she gets really into this,
Yeah.
that whole medical moment, I guess, was
Right.
based off of these people who, whether they meant to do it out of the goodness of their hearts or not,
Yeah.
we're robbing the subjects, their patients, of autonomy and voice, and
Right.
basically saying, like, basically that a lot of people who wanted to transition for whatever reasons, they saw the diagnostic and sort of like the whole, like, going through the process of the bureaucratic process of having to account for themselves to these scientists, basically, as a block to actually achieving what they were trying to get to. And so it was just like a lot of people BSing their way through that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually Natalie Wynn talks about this in ContraPoints, like how the whole being in the wrong body thing is, a lot of people use it just because it's a way to make sense to normies or children or something, but it's like, there's a lot of reasons. This is just one reason that people can kind of accept.
I know plenty of, I can name 3 off the top of my head right now that, like, women that just cut off their boobs because they hated them. Like, and do you know what they had to do in order to do that? They lied, like, to doctors for years about being trans when they don't feel in any way that they were born in the wrong body. They just don't like the fact that they have breasts. Getting and insurance to cover it is another thing, that, like, oh, you have to have this very specific history, and because there's these hoops you have to jump through, you jump through them, and then, like, once they got their boobs cut off, they're like, okay, and just, like, went about living their life as if nothing happened.
It was such a process for them, whereas these researchers and scientists wanted to understand it and know, and these people like, look, I just don't want a dick anymore. Like, I just don't want to feel like this, basically.
And so the term transgender, I don't remember the years in which it sort of became the new accepted term, but really the foundation, or the foundational argument against the using of the word transsexual is that it's reifying this medical industrial complex that's arisen out of this specific process of, this is how you diagnose a trans person, is you go to therapy for a couple of years, and then you get this diagnosis, and then if your doctor thinks that it's okay and you're medically safe, then you start the hormones at very low doses, and over the next 2 years you up the dosages, and at that point they're still convinced that they need some kind of surgery, then you put them on a waiting list for a year, and at the end of that, if they're still convinced, then you get the surgery. Like, that was a very specific model that still exists in some parts of the country, and that was the recommended model for treatment. And when we are using the word transsexual, me specifically, and the author of this essay, Sandy Stone, were talking about that framing of gender as, okay, this is a medical, like, mental disorder, and these people feel like they need to have a surgery that's going to correct something about them that's wrong, right? And this idea of biological wrongness, I think, is very innate to that. Nowadays, I use the word transsexual to refer to specifically people who want to transition, because the term transgender is become more of an umbrella term.
Right.
And so I've heard people frame transgender as including all non-binary people, whether or not they actually identify with the term transgender, as including intersex people for some reason that I'm still trying to figure out how they're conceptualizing it. But basically anybody who doesn't fit neatly into the 2 boxes that are available here in the West, right? And because that is so, can be referring to so many different things, I still use the word transsexual very often, because immediately everybody in the room knows what you're talking about, and it's very specific. So yeah, it's.
Do you use trans as for short as the umbrella?
Me?
Yeah.
Usually, yeah. Yeah. But that's I guess why people nowadays are having this kind of blowback to transsexual, because it's specifically medical, and has a lot of baggage associated with it, and because it's not inclusive enough, I guess, and there's this very much a focus nowadays on inclusivity of various people's histories.
Well, it seems like the umbrellaizing effect
Sure.
is in line with what she's interested in.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
the idea of she's because the passing, like the effort to make oneself culturally recognizable as the other gender, the one that you were not
Right.
assigned, right? This is the act of trying to pass.
Right.
And that is also like sort of a renunciation of what she calls mixing,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Or the
absolutely.
mixing of genres.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is like,
Yeah.
so gender queer for me, like that means mixing, I guess,
Yeah.
in the terms that she would use, right?
Mhm. Yeah. It's very, I think I absolutely am very confident that Sandy Stone is absolutely thrilled on how much social progress we've made on this and how gender queer as a conception, like as a gender that's an option, is like somewhat intelligible. And she would also say that probably that the unintelligibility of other genders and the kind of gender mixing, or it's a fluidity between this day I'm this or this day I'm that. I think that Sandy Stone would think that that is liberating in some way, of getting the act of getting rid of these two very distinct genres that are strictly only intelligible as separate is good. And I think that that's part of what she's trying to accomplish here. At the very end, she only hints at it here, but later in her later work, she's definitely much more explicit.
Well, I think that, so a world that is just like where we're all not able to kind of just assume such a simple way of categorizing things would be safer just for more people in general, especially like the 1 out of 100 people who's intersex, right?
Sure.
Like otherwise you're like a social pariah. It's like this big, deep, dark secret.
Right.
Well, why? Well, that's literally just like the way your society is. So it's
Yeah.
like you can make it so that that's not like a huge like, so that the parents aren't faced with like this false choice.
Right.
Oh, we have to make a choice. The child will have to be
Yeah.
this one way or this other way. And it's like, no, your
Right.
child can be left alone. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah. And I think that this, as many qualms as I have with it, the transgender umbrella of kind of like making the overlap between male and female more of an option, or even not being totally separate, being more culturally intelligible, I think was a prerequisite towards what I'm very hopeful we're going to see here in the next 10 years, which is that operations that are not like medically necessary for the child's like immediate physical health are going to be completely illegal. I think we're absolutely headed that direction, and we're already seeing that in legislation for countries that are not here, and a couple of states have already passed laws that ban operations on intersex infants. And I don't think we wouldn't be at a place culturally where that would even be a discussion if it weren't for this greater visibility of trans people generally. Yeah.
So just to clarify, you're talking about the move is in the works and will be over the course of the next 10 years.
Sure.
From it being normal to do surgery on babies who are intersex to make them conform better to one set, like one of a binary.
Yeah.
Versus, and that'll just be banned, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the future. Yeah. And I think I also heard, this is probably a lot more of a stretch, but I think that will then be used later, maybe 20, maybe 30 years down the road, for like banning, the same logic. I mean, based on how law works in this country, is sort of like every decision is made based on past rulings, right?
Right.
And so that banning, I think, that is coming at a Supreme Court nationwide level on intersex infants is probably going to be extended to like
infant male
What's the
genital
word? Yes,
mutilation.
thank you. What's
Circumcision?
the word? Circumcision.
Yeah.
I'm only happier right now. Thank you for being
Infant male genital
Yeah.
stultification is
So
actually a
that
better
is-
term.
I think that being illegal on the same grounds that intersex operations are going to be illegal very soon is also coming. And again, that will be due again to the social ball of rolling of like, this is okay and acceptable.
I just have to, I didn't realize, so I've written like a 22-page paper that I put a lot of research into on circumcision, male circumcision,
Sure.
and how it's like, in many ways is denying basic human rights, dignity, future pleasure is being
Sure.
undermined. It's based off of all these old superstitious ideas. I'm not just talking about religion. I'm mainly talking about medical science. Like
Right.
it was, the reason it got introduced into the U.S. was as a preemptive cure for paralysis
masturbation.
and blindness and
No,
furry palms.
It's
And
masturbation.
no, but that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
because they thought that all of those things
Yeah.
were caused by masturbation.
Yeah, no,
And
they
so they-
didn't.
they-
I don't think they did.
Well, I
Maybe
mean,
they
I got
did.
books about it. Yeah,
I know.
no. So like the it makes masturbating easier, but it also makes
Sure.
wet dreams easier. So like
Absolutely.
if you don't take
Right.
take it into your own hands, then
Right.
your sleep will take care of it.
Right.
Instead, you just end up all like suppressed if you don't do anything about it.
Sure.
And so also, but no, I just realized the other day though that it also makes docking more difficult. So like putting two penises together and then like playing with them. If you have two foreskins on there, you can grab those foreskins
Oh,
and you can just kind of, you can just,
I wasn't ready.
yeah. Sorry, I should have warned everybody. Okay, we're getting some laugh emojis on our faces. That's good. That's good. But I'm serious. That's some real shit. That's some real shit.
You're right.
I never thought about doing it because I didn't have a foreskin. But if I'd had a foreskin, I probably would have been like, damn, that's a thing I could do.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
So that was like, I don't know, that was just like a fun conversation. It was just like a randomly like came up like, damn, that's actually a thing that you could do. It's basically like, it's like dick scissoring, you know? It's like,
Oh my God.
so thanks, Mom.
Oh my God.
No dick scissoring for this one. Yeah.
I'm glad I came today.
Could have come way more outcomes.
Oh my God.
All right. All right.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Turn off.
Holy hell.
All right. So.
Hashtag bring back dick scissoring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
So what else do we
anyways,
have? What else do we need to touch on before we can all go to the BRC for our free meals? We can all get in for free.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes.
they're giving away. People have like donated their guest swipes.
Oh heck yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, that's not important to you,
Oh
internet
my
people.
gosh.
You're not here.
Unless Daniel wants to.
Unless Daniel wants to meet with us at the BRC.
So let's see. Oh, I'll just say that one follow the difference between transgender, transsexual. For me, it's just useful just to say trans, and then as the umbrella, and transsexual to narrow it in, and that if that's necessary, right? And transgender also does narrow it in a certain way. To say someone's transgender when transsexual is in your vocabulary, kind of picks them out as probably not transitioning, right? Like in that way. That just seems
I
to
guess
be,
if you're personally like with the way you use transsexual is the medical term, right?
yeah.
And then when you're using transgender, you're referring to people that probably fit under the trans umbrella, but aren't maybe undergoing surgery or hormones or whatever, but they still identify with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
It seems useful to me.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
trans is
For
inclusive
sure.
of both, and then you can
Okay.
break it down with those two. And people who want to get really upset about transsexual being used,
Sure.
okay, so to be fair, I've not seen a whole lot of that personally. But there was a person in the ContraPoint State meme stash who got super riled up because someone had said transsexual, and they're just like, don't ever say it, and blah, 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 blah. And we were all just kind of like, so like, if you don't like it, you can express that, but to tell other people not to use it, like, this is not a word that it gets to be treated as though it's like some other word in some hate speech category.
Yeah.
This word means something to people who use it who are literally transsexual. So you don't get to just all of a sudden say some people don't get to use it. And furthermore, speaking of it being in the ContraPoints dang meme stash, Natalie uses it. So, because she jokingly referred to herself as the transsexual Gandhi. And that's a fucking meme right
How
there.
did I miss that?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
You gotta find that. I'll track it down for you.
Okay. Sexual Gandhi.
Okay, so but anyway, I think that covers that question, but also the
Good question, by the way. Whoever asked that.
Daniel, thank you.
one of the other things that that Sandy Stone is, that's the author, right? Yeah,
Yes.
is bothered by with the way that transsexual was being thrown around in the discourse, especially scientific, was how totalizing and monistic it was. She said, like, basically, it's here we have a category that is not one of the two rigid designators of, you know, male versus female. It's like this problematic third term or whatever. And people are using it as just like a third term that you could peg someone into. And it's like, no, its very definition is that it's like everything outside of these two things. It's like, it's going to come from so many different directions.
Yeah.
It's not going to be reducible into the same cut. The whole point is that it's not fitting some cut.
Yeah, I mean, she literally says, I suggest constituting transsexuals not as a class or problematic third gender, but rather as a genre, a set of embodied texts whose potential for productive disruption of structured sexualities and spectra of desire has yet to be explored. So I think that definitely like kind of breaks it down that no, they're not just this other thing, but they kind of have experience in both binary genres, and then they have this completely different experience that they're completely ignoring, that the researchers are completely ignoring, because they just want to like get in and out as fast as possible and forget about this past so that they can feel like they're in the right body, because thinking about that is so like taboo to them, so taboo to the community, I feel like. And
yeah, let's talk about that usage of the word text really quick, just as like a basic. So is everyone familiar with using it in this way? Can you restate that part, that clause? Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I suggest constituting transsexuals not as a class or problematic third gender, but rather as a genre, a set of embodied texts whose potential for productive disruption of structured sexualities and spectra of desire has yet to be explored. Embodied texts.
So I only wanted to bring that up because in my critical theory class I took with Gautam Basuta-Kerr, is one of my favorite professors on campus here. We read Roland Barthes on basically an essay about the difference between a book and a text in a postmodern sense. The difference is like the book is the bounded, like the words that you have contained within that book, whereas a text is sort of it overflows that into it's kind of where it's coming from and where it's going. And so there's a sense in which that the fan fiction might fit into the text. So like,
sure.
Let's just use Game of Thrones. It's actually a really good example because we have fan fiction for Game of Thrones that if that's really popular within the circles that are big geeks for this stuff, actually comes in on people's interpretations of the primary text or books, and then also might influence the author himself while he's alive, because George R.R. Martin has been influenced by, one, the actual adaptation into the show, but two, also is influenced by the fan theories and the fan fiction. And so there's no way of saying Game of Thrones is reducible to just this series of books because it's messier. And basically text means messier. the book is sort of a totalization. It's the totalized form of a text, whereas the text is overflowing it. It's infinite.
Right.
It's transcendent.
Text is the living canon in a way.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, and it's also as living canon, just like with a religion, when it has to argue about what gets canonized and what stays
Right,
canon
yeah,
and stuff
right.
like that. It's an argument. It's always an ongoing argument.
Yeah.
So for someone to say, well, Plato's canon, okay, well, in a denotative sense, sure, because that's just true right now. It's also contestable. It wouldn't be a canon, and we wouldn't be in a discourse if we were just to assume that as a brute fact and then move on because it's never negotiable again. I would argue that it needs to stay canon, but at the same time, for it to not be an argument, you'd live in a totalitarian regime.
Right.
And so any discourse has its canonical factors, and those are always contested sites, which is, maybe you could word search for contested, because there's a really great sentence here I don't want to dig up where she says that the transsexual body is a site of contestation.
Yeah.
Right? I love that. And it's, so this actually, and also like you see this stuff online, people are, this is the gatekeeping people do, right?
The exact quote, in this construction as well, the transsexuals have been resolutely complicit by failing to develop an effective counter discourse. Here on the gender borders at the close of the 20th century, with the faltering of the phallocratic hegemony and the bumptious, God, I love her choice of words, appearance of heteroglossic origin accounts, we find the epistemologies of white male medical practice, the rage of radical feminist theorists, and the chaos of lived gendered experiences meeting on the battlefield of the transsexual body, a hotly contested site of cultural inscription, a meaning machine. What a great term. For the production of the ideal type. Representation at its most magical, the transsexual body is perfected memory inscribed with the true story of Adam and Eve as the ontological account of irreducible differences, an essential biography which is part of nature, a story which culture tells itself. The transsexual body is a tactile politics of reproduction constituted through textual violence. God damn.
Yeah.
God damn, dude.
I feel like as soon as you can,
You read those three sentences and you understand why this is still being referenced today.
I also feel like anybody who can read and fully understand that passage you just read should just be given a bachelor's. I mean, straight up, like that, it requires a sort of like bachelor level understanding of at least theory, if not like English.
At least, English and postmodernism.
Yeah.
Like, holy hell.
So let's break it down for people who don't have bachelors in that.
Okay.
Because I do, and I feel like I can follow most of it, but it's a lot. That's a loaded.
The beginning is the easiest part. First of all, she's saying that transsexuals are themselves complicit by failing to develop a counter discourse, right? And this is part of what she's trying to do. Mm-hmm. We good? Okay. The next sentence. Here on the gender borders at the close of the 20th century, with the faltering phallocratic hegemony and the bumptious appearance of heteroglossic origin accounts.
So phallocratic would just be the rule of
people with penises.
People with penises,
yes.
Right? Whereas hegemony is just like, it's this total rule.
Yes.
The bumptious appearance of the heteroglossic, I'm lost on all three. Well, I know what appearance means, but what's a bumptious appearance of heteroglossic radical feminist theories? It seems like
bumptious just means to be like overly assertive.
Okay, so we've got some very the definitive take discourses.
Yeah. Heteroglossic is a word that I don't use every day.
What?
Fake feminist.
Hetero means many. Glossic, it would be categories and stuff?
Yes, you got it, dude.
Okay, many categories?
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Oh, thank you. A nerd, dude. Do you have a bachelor's degree? Okay, so in plain language then, where were we at? Okay. Here on the gender borders at the close of the 20th century, with the faltering of the absolute rule of people with penises and the overly assertive appearance of heteroglossic, which we said many categories, right?
Mm-hmm.
We find the epistemologies of white male medical practice. That sentence.
So I honestly, there was a time in my life where I thought that was some bullshit.
Yeah.
And then I read enough essays where I was like, okay, no, it makes sense. Okay. Because there's a lot of examples of how you just have certain kinds of blinders and unconscious or subconscious like prejudices, so that when you're going out just looking for the facts and data, but you're collapsing those into certain frames that you've assumed or grown into, and those frames just kind of fit you as the de facto subject in a society.
Right.
It skews everything, and it can skew things to the point that it makes other people's entire ways of life unrecognizable or degenerate or delinquent or something like that. Like, it's just like, this just doesn't make sense.
And we still see this in like a very practical example. This is changing, thank God. But like for the longest time, all surgeons practiced finding certain things on the human body on white subjects explicitly and exclusively. So like, this is what it looks like if somebody has melanoma, right? But only on a white patient. And so later in 20 years on, when they're actually practicing, right, they might not catch it early enough. And so that what you were saying was sort of the de facto subject kind of thing is basically what she's referencing here.
Right, and just taking it back to that privilege example we used of the bicycle in that one conversation. It's
that was
the de facto subject. If you are a city builder and you're building a city and you only drive cars,
right,
you're going to kind of miss an entire way of setting up that city for people who ride bicycles, right?
Yeah.
That's a way that your de facto subject status can skew things to a point where it actually kills people.
Yeah.
And that example of melanoma is a great one.
Okay, next part. The rage of radical feminist theories and the chaos of lived gender experiences meeting on the battlefield of the transsexual body.
This is just the internet now.
Yeah. I don't think anything more needs to be said there. A hotly contested site of cultural inscription. That's a good word.
Yes. So is everyone comfortable with talking about inscription on bodies? What's that mean? So I feel like that's really important. Okay, so I'll say a thing about it, because it's definitely, this will be encountered in Judith Butler's.
A lot, over and over.
And that's part of the reason is because she wants to get away from the Nietzschean. So she thinks that one of the things Foucault does with Discipline and Punish, which is one of his main works, is to take the Nietzschean project of the genealogy of morals, which basically develops a kind of repression and turns it into inscription. So it's a move from repression to inscription. So what does that mean? The repressed subject is one that desires things and then is punished into a way of like not being, so you don't pursue the thing that you automatically desire. You don't steal the toy from the other child. You don't get to touch yourself whenever you want to. You have to wear clothes most of the time. Right. There's all of these kinds of trainings that you're put through as a child. And so you repress certain ways of like wanting to be or, pursue your desires or whatever. That and the idea of like this repression is like that you repress that and then it gets sublimated out other ways. You find other ways of expressing it, and sometimes those come out really gross or like messed up, right? So like people who believe in this theory will typically ascribe like some of the worst neuroses or crimes to well, that's just this person didn't have a healthy outlet, right. For that thing that was repressed. Inscription takes it away from like the psychical domain and takes it to more of like this textual domain. It's a way of understanding yourself within a symbolic order. Symbolic coding comes into play. I think well, let's all try to use different examples. I'm going to stop in a second, but I'll just use one example. And it's just, so like if you have a penis, then there are literal privileges that come with that in a society that's kind of built around the phallocratic order. But also people will have certain assumptions about you, treat you differently.
Sure.
That's not just you. That's not just up to you. That's the society you're thrown into. It's something you have to navigate around other people's perceptions. And so you've basically been inscribed by that social order, right? So what it means that you have that, when there's a symbolization, and your body, it being a certain way, carries certain meanings, it's like it's been inscribed with meaning, right? So you think it's easy to think that your body is just this brute fact, and then the rest of the meaning making is up to your individual self or other individual selves. But there's this big other, this symbolic order that you're in, and it's not up to me and it's not up to you. We don't get to just decide tomorrow that our meaning is different to the broader society, the broader population that you live in. That's something that we have to like deal with, contend with, cope with. Right. The inscription. Yeah. So, and what are some better examples?
The inscription is mostly aesthetic, at least insofar as what Sandy Stone is talking about when it comes to transsexuals, right? And this is why the focus on passing, because by changing your aesthetic, other people will change what meaning they ascribe to your body, right? And so, like you mentioned, they treat you differently at a very, very foundational level. The way that we talk in English to women and about women is very different than the way that we do to men.
Yeah.
The words that we use and the way that we structure our sentences, like as weird as that sounds, is literally different. To the point where it used to be certain ways of talking about women used to literally be considered grammatically incorrect. And that's changed, I think, since the 80s and the 90s, but it's literally the language the framing of that sort of distinction at its base level is done by everybody based on aesthetics. Another example of cultural inscription?
I mean, a real obvious example is being of an ethnic minority in a racialized society where there are things that you can and cannot do in the most explicit way. In the most explicit, like just not being able to vote. Or not being able to go into certain stores, having to use certain fountains.
Sure.
Your body's been inscribed with meaning that it's not like that fucking grew on a tree somewhere. Right.
And again, and it's so interesting as well to read. I don't know if anybody here has read the Diary of an Ex-Colored Man or other similar works, basically by African Americans who are living in the Jim Crow era that pass as white. They literally got to live in both worlds. It's the most heartbreaking shit, because you never realize the degree to which the most mundane things are totally different from not just the way that people treat you when you're around, but the way that people talk about you or the way that people talk about others. Yeah.
Sweet.
Good example. Okay, this is my favorite part. Again, backing up in the sentence, talking about the battlefield of the transsexual body. A meaning machine for the production of the ideal type. Repression at its most magical. Representation, I'm sorry, dyslexia.
Representation.
Dyslexia, hello. A A meaning machine for the production of the ideal type representation at its most magical. Again, talking about the being a hotly contested site culturally.
Now, when we say representation, right, there's a couple of ways of construing that. And so I think, are we talking political representation here?
No.
Okay. So we mean more like linguistic meaning making slash
Yes.
semiotic.
Yes,
Okay.
semiotic representation.
Okay.
And that's why she says the meaning machine for the production of the ideal type.
And is that because there's this idea, the ideal types are men and women?
Yep.
And so like the fact that there is this existent category, but that it is forcibly like it's this category has to be in movement from one to the other.
Yes.
Therefore, it
Yep.
reifies those categories.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what she means when she's, that was perfect deconstruction, because that's literally what she means when she says representation at its most magical, because you're literally magically going from one category to another, and there's nothing in between there, nothing to see, everybody. Like,
Yeah.
it's like there's nothing behind the curtain. It's like literally a magic act. The transsexual body is perfected memory inscribed with the true story of Adam and Eve as the ontological account of irreducible differences.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's
That's a lot of words.
That's a lot.
So ontology is just the philosophical practice of rigorously trying to describe what's most real.
Right.
But as it pertains to beings,
Right.
The onto is being, and ontology, study of beings.
Right. And
beings.
and she's basically just saying this thing that she just said again in a different way.
Right.
So it's being inscribed with the true story of Adam and Eve as the ontological account of irreducible difference just is another fancy way of saying there's two, everything else is magic. Don't
Right.
think about it. And by the way, when we say there's two, we mean that like literally, and there's nothing else to look at here. Like ontologically,
There's not almost 8 billion.
these two
There's
are the most real categories. Yeah.
And it actually is very like platonic. Like they're
Oh,
the
absolutely.
ideal forms.
It's very platonic.
It's like we're all
yeah,
just degenerated
from that,
from these
Yeah.
two
from
ideals,
Eve and Adam
and
as the ideal
the
woman,
degree to
ideal
which
man.
you are
Yeah.
true is the degree to which you approximate a resemblance
Yes.
to
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And to change is to hop over one.
Right.
That's why
Absolutely.
a lot of gender theory tends to be very what's the opposite of platonic? Not nomadic, but it is kind of, but no, nominal.
Yes.
Nominalistic,
yes,
right?
Nominalistic.
Which is instead of like this top-down categorical way of understanding things, it's more of a bottom-up. It's where no, humans aren't subsumed into universals. Universals are just a way of trying to organize, try to make sense of things. But in reality, it's messy because it's like it's particulars.
Yes.
Particulars
Right,
up.
right, right.
Universals are just tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An essential biography, which is itself a part of nature. She's basically breaks down what she just said for us right there. A story which culture tells itself. The transsexual body is the tactile politics of reproduction constituted through textual violence. I'm having flashbacks to philosophy club. Every time I see the word textual violence
my
now.
Oh, you mean
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
shit. Yeah, it was a sticking point. We had to keep going back to
Kept
violence.
going back
There
to-
were basically people present
Yeah.
who did not buy that we should be using the words violence in this case because
Right.
they wanted to be like,
Violence is strictly this.
it's me punching you.
Yeah, right. What's the it's this idea of harm that like Mill is very much attached to, right? Violence is harm of another person.
Did that person who clarified in their two ways of using violence help at all? I don't think they got it
Mm-mm.
systemic violence still.
No, I don't
Right.
think so.
So the whole point is that like textual violence something can be textually violent or symbolically violent insofar as, like, if my body is described such that I will get denied access to healthcare, or I will get denied, like, what basic things that any healthy human being is going to be able to have.
Sure.
That's fucking violent. There's really
Yeah.
no other way of putting it. And it was a dumb sticking point.
And it's the
Yeah.
the term in this case, textual violence, is just referring to what's at the root of that, or what's causing the violence, which is this ontological conception of two. And that framing is the internal subconscious thing that we've been raised and bought into without thinking about it. It's the fundamental truth that we hold, and that fundamental truth that the culture, broadly speaking, holds is at the root of the violence. And that's all
if we taught our children that there are two valid heights,
right,
and that you can approximate that height by
right.
about 4 inches,
Yeah.
and that you'll be okay.
Right.
So there's like 5 feet and there's 7 feet, and each one's allowed to vary by 4 inches.
Right.
And everyone else, well, we don't really talk about them.
Yeah. They don't. That's not real.
We don't. That's not really real. They're kind of fucking up.
Yeah.
How would that play out on the playground? Well, there's a bunch of kids that get beat up all the time.
Oh yeah.
There'd be like 2 classes of kids beating up all the other kids.
Right.
And it would just be this ad hoc categorical way of, dividing up reality that doesn't make sense, and it is literally violent.
Yeah. That is a great approximation of the ridiculousness in a way that I think people are not conditioned to thinking about this. That's yeah. Let's see. A story which culture tells itself. Yeah, that was basically the end of the part that I read. It's like, I don't know, I feel like this 42, I forgot about this paragraph, is like pretty foundational to does a good summary of the whole of the whole last part of the essay.
Yeah. It's a damn good paragraph.
And the part of this kind of relates it back to what she was talking about before, and what we were talking about before, that it's difficult to generate a counter discourse if one is programmed to disappear. She used this word I used. Magical. Yeah. The highest purpose of the transsexual is to erase him or herself and to fade into the normal population as soon as possible. Part of this process is known as the construction of a plausible history, learning to effectively lie about one's past. What's gained is acceptability in society, and what is lost is the ability to authentically represent the complexities and ambiguities of lived experiences. Thereby is lost that aspect of nature, which Donna Haraway theorizes as coyote and Native American spirit animal, who represent the power of continual transformation, which is the heart of engaging life. Instead, authentic experience is replaced by a particular kind of story, one that supports the old constructed positions. This is expensive and profoundly disempowering. Whether desiring to do so or not, transsexuals do not grow up in the same way as GGs or genetic naturals, which are terms that nowadays, by the way, if you ever say either of those, the internet will explode at you. But thank God that we're not stuck in 1993 anymore.
True. Yeah, the rate at which discourse has evolved surrounding these things is wild, right? And I think that there are people who like to be like, okay, I had a conversation just like 2 weeks ago with someone who they're glad that there has been, leaps and bounds, in gay liberation, and people's ability to, express themselves more freely.
Sure.
But they're so sick of having their face rubbed in it. And this was all in the same paragraph of an actual statement, like, face to face.
Yeah.
Where they were like, basically just like they didn't like my hair and they wanted to let me know.
Yeah.
And it was just like they wanted me to. They're like there's been like 3 times in the last like month and a half where someone went out of their way to be like, I have to be honest with you. It's just like, what? No, you fucking don't. I'm never fully honest with everybody around me. Like what you.
Life is a series of acting out how we expect other people to think that we're going to behave. Yeah. You don't have to be, if everybody just spoke their mind all the time, we wouldn't have friends.
Yeah. It's learning how, like, is this useful information? Like, I don't feel like this was useful. Anyway, but their point though is just like, it's like with race, like racism's not a problem. It's like, well, that struggle's been done. It's over, and I'm good. I feel like I'm good with the world, and stop problematizing that. Let's just move on. And it's like, we're just learning how to talk about these things, like, and you're just saying you don't want to have to learn how to talk about these things.
Yeah.
So anyway. Did anyone want to finish off with any other points for the reading? Like, we covered a lot.
We did. I think we broke it down, like her main point in the manifesto pretty well.
Yeah.
Frank asked something, I think, before
What's the
Daniel
question?
some comment.
He was responding to something.
Okay, so Daniel and Frank are talking in the comment section. That's what's going on. All right.
Yeah.
Sweet. This was a nice little
really
primer.
quick though. I'll finish it out with the quote that I thought was like her thesis. Like, this is what needs to happen.
Okay.
She says, "We need a deeper analytical language for transsexual theory, one which allows the sorts of ambiguities and polyvocalities which have already so productively informed and enriched feminist theory."
Bomb.
Right there. There it is.
That's it.
Yeah. So
Cool.
All right.
And Ari, so you were the one who said you had not done it, and so so I'm just curious then, like, do you feel like this was all over your head, or were we able to break it down pretty well? And then do you feel like you have any questions or anything like that?
I think some of it was over my head, but I think a lot of it, once you like kind of went through like word by word and kind of broke it down, I was able to digest it. And yeah, I think it was a really fascinating topic. Some things I've never really thought of, especially when it comes to the people that are intersex and such. It's just something that like doesn't even cross into a lot of people's minds, but it's just a huge part of the population.
There's probably more intersex people than there are gingers.
I think that's true. I think it is.
Yeah, it depends on how you define intersex, because some definitions of word intersex don't include certain genetic abnormalities because people look biologically female, even though depending on how you define biologically female, they aren't, because again, our society is based off of aesthetically putting people into the 2 categories. Some people don't qualify that as intersex, even if they aren't able to have kids because they look this way. But if you, broadly speaking, you take, I guess, the most wide definition of intersex, then it's definitely true that there are more intersex than redheads. Yeah. Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought I learned a lot. It was really great discussion. Questions.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Sick. So we've been meeting at 5 on Sundays. We're gonna move to 4:30 on Sundays.
Saturday for gender trouble, right?
Is it Saturday?
Put it on Saturday.
Is it really?
I think so.
What?
What?
I mean, that's fine. We'll keep it that way. I'm glad you caught that because I would have shown up a day late.
Maybe.
What is December
Yeah,
15th?
that's a Saturday.
That's a Saturday.
Oh. I have to go fix my Patreon where I told people it would be Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Saturday the 15th, Saturday the 29th, and
And the-
Saturday the 5th.
Okay, so Saturdays at 4:30 now.
And we will release like a list of like what sections, what pages we'll be reading by those meeting times.
There's 3 chapters. That's
Doing that?
basically
Okay.
There's like an introduction. There's chapters 1 and chapter 2. I'm 95% positive
Okay.
that that's.
We will confirm and put it on Facebook and in an email.
Yeah, and I expect I'll be releasing a sort of
You too,
book
Daniel.
trailer video in the next week. That prepares. Well, what I kind of want to do is just like a couple. I want to recapitulate this basic point about inscription,
Yeah, that was really helpful.
and maybe for normalization, like, and these will be like really, just like my longer term goal is to come up with like a really useful quality playlist of videos
Oh,
that are
so
short
here's
and to
this,
the
what
point.
does this word mean? What does this word mean? What, okay.
Each one for like 4 to
Yeah.
7 minutes. That would
Okay.
be like essential for people trying to get into this stuff.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
All right. Well,
this was great. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for all your questions, Daniel. You have a good holiday too.
thanks, Internet.
Boom.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.